All right, so it's time for the second turn. Technically, I should have done this yesterday, but it was still 100 degrees at 8 p.m., so yeah, that wasn't going to happen. All right, let's get into it. I should mention that the size has dropped fairly considerably. I mean, this should be up here, so we'll see how it does when I turn it and recombine it. But if the size is shrinking very quickly, then it's a definite sign you got too much nitrogen and not enough carbon, and it's just break it down too fast. It's definitely still moist and definitely smells like compost, and I can feel some heat. Yeah, she's cooking. All right, so actually let me wet this area first. All right, so like I mentioned in the previous video, think of it as an onion in layers, and you want to disassemble it in layers so the outside layer becomes the inside layer and vice versa. That gives you the most consistent breaking down of the components. And you can see we're still dealing with the matting of the office paper, so hopefully by the next turn it'll be considerably broken down. Whew. It smells a little acrid, so we'll see once we get in there. Might need to add a bit of straw. All right, so we got to the center here, and it's definitely too hot to touch, so I don't have a thermometer on me, but it's at least over 130, probably should be in the 140 to 150 range, which means we got enough fuel, we're cooking, but now the question is, do we have enough carbon to maintain the longer burn? So if you have too high a nitrogen, it's going to come up, get really hot real fast, and then burn itself out. So that's why you need the right ratio to prolong it over the time it needs for the bacteria to be in the right temperature range. All right, we're going to keep going. Okay, so we more or less got our height back, which is good. It means it's not cooking too fast and we're not losing material. So the carbon to nitrogen ratio is looking pretty good. On the next turn, I'll grab a thermometer so we can check the temperature. And yeah, some of it was a little dry, so I added some water, but more or less moisture content is pretty good. All right, let's put our tarp over and all right, so 2 days, we'll give it another turn. Okay, so time for the third turn. Let's see what's going on under here. Ooh, it's steaming. And size is pretty good. I did forget to mention that ideally you want some sticks or something to prop the tarp off the surface of the compost pile, because where the tarp and the surface meet, it can go anaerobic on you, which is not ideal, but anyway, let's get to it. Almost forgot to pre-wet our turning location. All right, so let's give this a little wet down. And I don't have a proper compost thermometer, which is a big probe that you can stick in the center of the pile. But I do have this, which will more or less do the job. Just you got to get a little up close and personal with the pile. So let's see what we got. So we'll do a outer reading first, and then we'll go for the center. We're up to 135. 140. Definitely got some heat, so might even be too hot. So let's open her up a bit. See if we can get at the middle. So we're up to 147, which is pretty good. 150, kind of the ideal. 148, so it's also, let's see if we can do a little moisture test without burning myself. Set that down. Yeah, so ideally when you're squeezing that, you want just a couple drips. And that's an indication that your moisture content is at the right level. So it just looks like the cooking process is drying out the center a bit. So it's not a big deal. It just means every time we turn it, we're probably gonna have to keep adding water. So 148, that's pretty good. Make sure I give that a good wash. All right. I don't know where that came from. It's pretty much impossible to avoid plastic. I will mention the one annoying thing about using junk mail, office paper, things like that is these stupid plastic windows on the envelope. So if you're not super particular about sorting that stuff, these are going to end up, you're just going to basically be removing them from your compost pile all the time. So and if you shred it with the window in, it's even more of a pain in the ass to get rid of. So all these things, it's really, if you look at it from an energy audit standpoint, you know, energy in for energy out, it's, I think, the most unemotional way to look at using things or processes, because you might think, oh, well, I have all this paper on hand, I should use it instead of driving 6 miles to go buy straw. But is the energy you're using to process the paper worth it? You know, that's, you know, it's up to you and your circumstances. But it's also good to experiment and see, if this is my only source of carbon, then how am I going to work with it? So, but it's definitely, I wouldn't call it ideal. I think office paper is probably best used as sheet mulching, really. Okay, so just a little demonstration on the pros and cons of using office paper. So here's, I don't know, 7 or 8 layers of what looks like old printer paper with the side. But look at this, came out of the middle of the pile, and you can read this just as clear. But if I put it down here and I blast it with water, it disintegrates. So look at that. It just becomes pulp, which is a lot easier to compost through. So just something to consider. If you're going to use office paper, you really need to break it down in as small pieces as possible. All right. Well, we are nearly done with the turn. Other than the stubborn office paper, everything's looking pretty good. So I think primarily using, we still gotta figure, see what the finished product's gonna be, but all indicators are that food scraps by themselves with some carbon and a few local weeds seems to be a pretty good formula for, still gonna be really high quality compost, and a really good way to handle your waste on site. It's going to be smelly the first few turns. It is going to attract pests, but that's just the nature of producing your own high quality fertilizer on site. So, also it's a pretty damn good workout. So you do this every 2 days. Probably don't need to go to the gym. Now there's a really cool thing that happens to the compost pile. Once you start breeding all those organisms and bacteria, it kind of becomes like a bit of a little jelly mold, because all the coatings and coverings on the organisms and bacteria just kind of all form together. So it's pretty interesting to see that develop. What I'm seeing is clumps of yet to be broken down office paper, but it's not unlike whenever you used cow manure in the past. You usually end up with little tennis ball sized clumps of poo that are the last to break down. So it's just the importance of turning it inside out each time, so everything has a chance to get broken down in the center where the party's happening. All right, give it one more wet down and be ready for the cover. All right, third turn. So far, so good. We'll see you for turn 4.